So today I'm going to be showing you guys step by step how to make your own button-up template and how to sew your own button-up using a different fabric. So this fabric I found at the thrift store. It is a curtain. Should be big enough. But our first step is going to be making our template. I found this button-up at the thrift store. It's slightly small on me, but I think it'll be a good example of just the process of making your own template firstly, and secondly, turning it into your own piece or your own button-up. So our first step is we're going to quite literally take you can take a seam ripper, which I have one, but I broke it a while back. So I will be using just a nice little straight edge, little X-Acto knife. So I'm really just going to go through and I'm going to start taking this apart stitch by stitch. You can take this apart using scissors, but I would recommend taking it apart stitch by stitch. It's going to teach you patience, firstly, and it's also going to teach you, or really just give you an idea of pretty much what it looks like to put the button up together by taking it apart. I guess you call that reverse engineering. But yeah, so I'm just going to go through and I'm going to pop all these stitches off. I am starting with the collar, just because that's pretty much the last piece that goes on, and you'll see when we actually make it ourselves the step-by-step process. But firstly, yeah, I'm gonna go through and I'm going to pull apart this entire thing, but I will not pull apart this. I'm going to leave this as is, and you'll see why later. So yeah, I'm just going to get going on this. I don't think you need to watch the entire process. Maybe I'll show you pulling apart a few pieces towards the end, but I'll meet you back at the point where this is pretty much taken apart. Okay, I've gotten all these separated. There's a whole bunch of little stragglers and whatnot, but my next step is I like to iron these seams out. It makes everything cutting out easier. So let's get on the iron and start pressing these flatter, and then we can start cutting out, and then we can start sewing. Now there's a few things we can go over. If you look at the collars, there's this white stuff. This is called interfacing, and it is used to stiffen the collar so it sits better. And as you can see, it's on the actual collar itself, and then it's on the base of the collar that sits like that underneath it. You can get some if you really think it's necessary. I don't think it's terribly necessary. Again, just personal preference, but that's what that is. And usually I have a little bowl, which I don't know where it went. Oh, it's right here. This, I just put all my scraps in. It's easy to move around. Kinda helps with the mess. I'm also very good at making messes, but that's just kind of part of the game. So let's start pressing, and then we can start sewing. Usually these seams are pretty hard to press open just because they've been sitting in the closed position, I guess you could say. Also, y'all are gonna have to bear with me. I usually sew in silence / listen to audiobooks, so I'm gonna really try my best to talk you through things. If it seems repetitive or self-explanatory, It probably is, but I think it's good and necessary to go over the smallest of details, especially when doing a button-up. A button-up I would not say is like a total beginner's project. Let's say it's an intermediate project, because we're going to be doing buttons, we're going to be doing some pretty interesting maneuvers, you could say, with the techniques that come with doing a button-up. But it's good practice to learn, and it's always important to challenge yourself. And also, you will notice that there are pieces like the front side, the front left just mirrors the front right of the button-up, and you may just realize you only need one, not two, and you can keep just one side and not two and just mirror it, but at the same time I think it's nice to have the entire pattern, because you can lay it out on something and make sure you have the space to accommodate all the pieces before you start cutting out, because I've had a few instances where I start cutting it out and I didn't realize that I don't have enough space or material to achieve my desired piece. And again, here's that interfacing. Really, the whole idea of interfacing is it provides stability, but it's also flexible. So a lot of the times you'll find interfacing in backpacks and things of that sort, because it provides some stability, because you don't want just a crazy floppy backpack. Well, sometimes you do, but you get what I'm saying. Interfacing is pretty awesome, and it's ironable, so one side has like an adhesive and the other side doesn't, and you pretty much lay it on top, cut it out, and then you take a cloth and you steam it on and it sticks, which is pretty nifty. Yeah, and this is one of our sleeves, and I actually didn't seam rip the hem, and I'll show you why once we start cutting out, but we're going to use the hem of the curtain to be the hem of our shirts, or the sleeves, and parts of like the base of the shirt, so we can just pretty much get one step out of the way, because hemming can be pretty interesting, especially a curved hem can be fairly tricky. So we're gonna just use a little trick that I've kind of figured out to work around that. So I'm going to just finish up pressing all these seams flat, and then I will see you on the floor with our new pattern we just tore apart and made. Okay, we have officially made our template. We have our material, so let's start scoping out where we want everything to be. So as I said earlier, with our hemlines and stuff on the sleeves and on the bottom of the, like around the bottom, this hemline, we're going to just use the same hemline that's already here, if that makes sense. So as you can see, this is wrong side out. So we're going to flip this John right over, and let's just see if we can fit all of our bottom hemlines onto this bottom part of our material, because we're going to have two sides. So this part is going to be accepting the buttons, right? So we're going to need a hem on that, and then we will also need a hem on the bottom, and it looks like this will fit perfectly, and that it does. So I'm going to start with this and cut it out. And then, yeah, we will go from there. Now, with cutting these out, we want to get our material and our template as flat as possible. And you can kind of see the way they hemmed this. It pulls up in the corners. I'm just going to have it be flat across. And then they also brought it in and it had little relief points, I guess you could call it. And I am not going to do that. So we're just going to start cutting. And again, we left all of our seam allowance, so we don't have to worry about cutting out our template and trying to remember to add seam allowance. Now you can tell they cut spots in certain areas. I'm not exactly sure why, but for the most part we can follow this to the exact dimension, and we know for a fact that it will all fit together. It's pretty nice. And that's why I recommend people make templates this way, because it's very user-friendly, and at the same time you can just roll this whole pattern up or template up into a ball, shove it in a corner, and it's not big old pieces of paper or anything flopping around making noise. You could throw this in a backpack if you wanted and go sew at your grandma's house or auntie's or whatever. So I think it's pretty fun, pretty easy, and very accessible way to make templates. So there's our first back piece. Let's go to these are our front side pieces. So I'm just going to try to square this off. Get the tag out of there. Square it off as best I can, kind of give it some tension. Looks pretty good. And remember, we want to utilize this hem that's already on the piece we're cutting out, because we're going to need that hem, because we don't want a raw edge, if that makes sense. Because if we did have raw edge, we would have to hem it, and that can get pretty tricky. So I'm just taking this as straight as possible, kind of just eyeballing it, because like you can see, I didn't seam rip this open all the way, but it should about sit right there. We really just want to make sure our arms are symmetrical and exact as possible, because it's hard to stretch this material. It's not stretchy. If you have a stretchy material, you have a little more of a safety net, but with this, we don't have much of a safety net. And then we also really want to make sure that our neck, this is where the collar will be going, is nice and exact. Doesn't have to be perfect. Now, instead of just using that, I'm going to take this and I'm going to mirror it. What I mean when I say mirror is we're going to cut this out on this side, and I'm just going to flip it over so the right sides are together. And you do this a lot in sewing to make sure you have symmetrical cutouts. Get that lined up nice and pretty. Looks beautiful. I think this material will make a very cool button up. I'm pretty excited. And we are just going to cut out the mirrored piece. And I know people say button-ups are pretty daunting, but in terms of just like actual pieces you're putting together, it's easier than, you know, big old crazy jacket or patchwork stuff, at least in my opinion, just because it's very straightforward. I'm gonna just make sure my neckline is as nice as I can get it. And this is why we have seam allowance, because you will mess up, and that's part of the game. So you have seam allowance to allow a little bit of wiggle room. So now, again, we're going to use this same hemline that we have been using for the bottom. And I think it'll actually look cool if this blanket was, or if this piece was bigger, or if I wanted all the lines to be the same way. You could cut it all out of the same axis, if that makes sense. But I kind of want to mess around with the lines a little bit. So again, this isn't going to be perfect, right? Because we have even the manufactured versions of clothing. Once you take it apart, you realize it's not perfect. But we're going to work with what we got, and at least our corners match up. And I'm just going to start cutting. And again, as a sewer, creative, whatever you want to call it, you're going to mess up, dude. I can guarantee it. But it's the fun part, at least for me. I think it's a blast. And that's the best way you can learn new things, is by just making stupid mistakes. And sewing's not absolute. You can, just like we took this apart, you mess up a stitch or something, you can just take the stitch back out and try again. Alright, I'm liking that. And just with our sleeves, we want to make sure, because these will be sewn together eventually, that they line up within reason. You cannot be dangerously critical on yourself. But point to point, that looks good. Cut it out like this. And we are going to, just like we did with the front panels, give it a flip. And repeat. Looks good to me. I see a lot of people talking about watching tutorials, and then they get halfway through and they realize, you know, don't do this or do that, and they've already done it. I would highly recommend watching through this whole thing and all tutorials in the future. This is just my personal opinion, but if you're going to watch a tutorial on how to sew or a sewing project, don't start until you've watched the whole thing. That way you know you have all the materials, you kind of have a general idea what to expect in terms of the process. And yeah, I just think it's a good little recommendation. And that will work. So we've got our sleeves, our back, our front. Now we just need the yokes and collars. And then with the yoke, so here we go. I'm going to match the direction that the lines are going for the main back panel. And we're going to need to cut out 2 of these. Should be perfectly symmetrical, so you don't have to worry about directions. And again, just with coming around this collar area, we want to really try our best to be somewhat precise. And some of this is hard as a lefty, but if I got any lefties out there, you'll get used to it. I did have to get left-handed scissors, though. You should see me trying to cut with right-handed scissors. It's terrible. So this yoke is going to be on the top part of our back panel. It's actually going to be our first step after we cut everything out, is getting our yoke attached to our main back panel. And the yoke kind of allows more of a curve to the top part of the back because the shoulders are a little more broad. And it's just it's just how they do it. I don't know who came up with it, but it's a brilliant way to relieve tension and whatnot on big backed people. You know, you get big old round broad shoulders, and usually the top of the back slopes, so if you just had one panel, it would fall off the back a little sharper than having a yoke. I think that's what it's called. Something like that, I reckon. And if you guys do enjoy these type of videos, I'd love to have you comment what else you'd like to see me make in depth and just show you start to finish on the process. I think this will encourage and help a lot of people in their own sewing journeys, especially towards sustainable sewing and sustainable fashion. I think it's very important, and it's just fun. I actually really enjoy it. So our yokes are done, and we have our sleeves, we're good. Collar stuff. Again, we're going to keep the lines going the same direction. The only lines that I want to be different are going to be the sleeves. I think it'll be a kind of cool little look. Now, when I was seam ripping these, I realized that they went crazy on these collars, and looks to be like the seam allowance isn't super symmetrical like that. It's 1/4 inch, and then it comes down to like 1/8 of an inch over there. So I'm just gonna try to run the whole 1/4 inch around. Yeah, like that. And then with a lot of these pieces, really just most sewing techniques and templates, you're gonna have a lot of symmetry going on. So when you're done cutting something out like this, you can take the time and fold it in half. Make sure it's within tolerance. See, like, it's not perfect right there, but it'll work. It's within our seam allowance. So there's one. And then I'm not sure, these might be the exact same size, but I like to just use each individual piece to ensure that if they are slightly different, because sometimes collars will be different to allow the stretch of the collar or the way it sits to kind of, I don't know how to explain it, force it to fall in one direction. And that'll make a little more sense when we're cutting or sewing everything back together. And now, just looking at this, are slightly different. So they are a little bit different. Looks like this one's a little longer on the bottom. So we will run with it. Now we have we had the collar stand or whatever, and now we have the actual collar. And like I said before, you can use fusible interfacing if you would like. That's that iron-on stuff that adds some sturdiness to specific pieces. They also use it a lot of the times in waistbands of dress pants and that kind of stuff. But again, like I said, I'm not terribly concerned about it because this material is thicker than the original material, and I think with a good iron it will lay the way we want it to. Again, just check for symmetry. Again, like I said, doesn't have to be absolutely within the exact millimeter, but within tolerance, you know. We don't want one going this way and one going that way. And there we have it, folks. That is our entire button up right there, besides our buttons. But our buttons and buttonholes will be the very last step, so I'm just going to keep these on here so I don't lose them. I am very keen on losing things, and you will notice that. I will go this way, and my scissors are gone. So keep that in mind, bear with me. And yeah, let's get our pattern laid out and start pinning and sewing. Alright, so our first step is going to be our main back panel, and then our two yolks. We're going to put our yoke down first, one like this, and then we're going to put our main back panel, and then we're going to put our other yoke on top, kind of like a sandwich. And then I'm going to go through and pin these together, or clip these together, you could say. And it kind of looks like the main back piece is a little longer, so we're going to see if we can't kind of redistribute it. Yeah, that should do it. Boom. So we have yoke, back piece, yoke. We're going to hop over to our sewing machine right quick. It looks like I'm just about out of thread, which that would have been the perfect color. Of course, we're out. See if we can't find something within reason. Yellow might be fun. Let's do that yellow. And maybe it'll contrast just enough to where you can get a little bit of a better visual. So we're just going to start with a straight stitch. I'm gonna sew out, so this is just gonna be a little bit longer. I'm just gonna trim down the extra. Alright, then our next step is we're going to take our sandwich and unfold it and pull the two yolks up. Now you can press this if you need to, but we want to make sure these line up top and we have all the tension out on the bottom. Alright, now we have our main back panel with our yoke at the top. And it actually didn't come out further. I thought it was going to come out a lot further. But it didn't, so we don't have to worry about that. Now we need to pick our right side versus our wrong side. I'm liking this side for our right side. And with almost all sewing processes, you're going to put things right sides together. Now to make sure we have these right sides together, a good way to tell, so this hem is, you can see it sticking out on that side, so that's our wrong side, this is our right side. This is the right side, so we put the right sides facing each other. Likewise with this is our right side, this is our right side, boom. Now we're going to pin up these guys, right sides facing each other, and we want to make sure we capture both pieces of the yoke, not just one. Because you'll see we're sewing 3 layers together right here. So we just want to make sure that we snag all 3 layers in there. Looks good to me. Likewise with this side. Boom. Boom. Work that up a little bit. And that looks like we will capture everything perfectly. Hop back to our sewing machine again. And again, we're just going to hit it with a straight stitch. Maybe get the sun out of here a little bit so you can see without a glare. We have all 3 pieces, the 2 yolks and our front panel. Beautiful. So I'm going to scoot on over to our serger. If you don't have a serger, you can very easily achieve the same effect using a zigzag stitch. We just want to make sure that we don't have any extra danglies hanging on. Because when you wash this after a while, this stitch will fray. We didn't serge this one in the yolk because it's sandwiched in there and you won't see it and it won't fray. So I'm just going to go to the right of my stitch. And serge both of these real quick. Nice and serged up. Gonna snip our ends. And yes, I do throw my extras on the ground. I vacuum once a week. Not terribly concerned about it. Okay, and now we're back to, we're going to do a top stitch. So we have our right side on this side. When we sewed them together like this, we're going to open it up. We're going to do a top stitch. Now, if you fold the seam this way, you want a top stitch on that side. If you fold the seam this way, you want a top stitch on this side. We want to fold the seam in, so we're top stitching on the yoke, not on our front panel, if that makes sense. So we're going to pull it in to our machine, and I like to just roll these up, just so I can get it inside that machine a little better. So again, we're going to fold it towards our yoke side, and we're going to do a top stitch. Now you can kind of just feel when, and you can also look underneath, but I can fairly well just feel. Great, and now we're going to do it again on the other side, and again we're folding it this way so our stitch goes on the yoke side. Folding it in. Alright, and there's our top stitch. Looks beautiful. It's on the yoke side, and we have that inside seam serged, so we won't have any fraying. Now, for the tricky part of sewing our sleeves on. This is probably the trickiest part. Honestly, trickier than our collar. So we have it laid out nice and flat. This is the left side, this is the right side. Everything is facing right side up. So this will be the outside. The inside will be against your back, if that makes sense. Now we have our two sleeves. I'm really hoping we cut it out correctly. And then I'm also going to take one of these sleeves, because they are directional. You can mess up and put the left on the right and the right on the left, and it won't sit right. So as you can see, this isn't the same as this, if that makes sense. Because when you're folding it on top, you're going to have a part of the shoulder. This hump isn't the same. You're going to have a little bit more to one side versus the other, if that makes sense. So we have our front panel, right? That's what that guy is. Just to gauge where we're at right now. Front panel, boom. And then this is our back panel, and then our yoke is sewn to our back panel. And this is going to be tricky because we're going to be sewing that onto itself. This I would really recommend taking your time on, and I will show you a nice little trick that we will use. So you can also stick this on your shoulder and see, okay, that feels right versus that feels right. So this piece is our right arm. So I'm going to make sure I have the right one. Yep, so this is our right arm. This is our right side. So just like before, we are going to make sure we are sewing them right sides together. The way we can tell this is the wrong side is the hem is coming in this way. There is no edge. So this is our right side, or this is our right side going to our right side. Now this can get tricky, but I found a nice little trick to do sewing curves together. So we're going to pin and start on one corner, and we're just going to walk it. Pin it, and walk it. Or clip it, I should say. And then walk it down. And I will say, it is easier to pin than to sew. Sewing these curves like this takes a lot of practice and a lot of patience, and you will get it. But just give yourself some grace. It's going to take some practice. And again, we're just going to walk this down the line, and we will see if this lines up. It's kind of a gamble sometimes, but technically it should all work out. And if it doesn't, we'll just redistribute the extra around the middle curve. So as you can see, we got a little bit of extra bunching up right here. So we're just gonna rework it through such. And it's okay to have extra right at the top, I've found, because you almost want it, because this is a pretty steep curve when you're sewing. And there we are. Now we're going to go to our other side. And mirror the same thing. If I knew where the other sleeve went, that would be nice. Here we go. And again, remember, right sides together. Boom, as such. And we're just going to pin it and walk it. Oops. Really hope you guys can see all of this. It's my first time using a POV me, POV Z, Zach. But yeah, I hope you can get a general idea of what we're doing. And you can just see the whole process, watch it, and then mimic it. Like I said, once I get down to here, I'm going to start on the other side. And just work it through. Got a little bit of extra material that we can redistribute. Boom. Looks great to me. So this part, I would say, is the most challenging part of the whole button-up process is getting sleeves going like this. But once you get it under control and figured out, the rest will be a breeze. So I'm just going to tag it down, back stitch, and just really want to make sure we're following our curve. Before we're done, just make sure we captured both sides. Beautiful. Hop on over to our other arm. Again, checking both sides, looks awesome. Hop on over to our serger. I found it's pretty challenging to serge a curve, but you really just gotta feed it through straight. So see, it starts to curve. We're just going to make sure it stays nice and straight, which isn't the easiest, but it's doable. And again, if you don't have a serger, you can just do a zigzag stitch on the outside, or some machines even have like a overlock stitch that will tie in. But I'm really just doing this to keep the fraying away. Awesome. Then we will hop over here somewhere. There we are. Okay, now that we have that done, straight on back to the sewing machine, and we're going to top stitch our sleeves. This is a little less tricky than the sewing on of the sleeve, but it is not the easiest. Now with our top stitch, again, You can top stitch on this side, or you can top stitch on this side. We want to top stitch to the left. A good way to remember is we're going to top stitch everything onto the yoke. All the top stitches belong on the yoke. Top stitch this side on the yoke, this side on the yoke, and we will do the same with our sleeves. So we're just going to make sure it's folded in the right direction. And when I say you can feel it, you can actually just feel the thickness, and you can feel that the seam is folded this way versus this way. And you can also see it. I'll show you in a second. So you can feel it, and then you can kind of see that it's hopping over to this side because it's thicker and the yoke wants to stay out. But we don't want it to do that, so we're going to fold it over. Make sure it's going in. Beautiful. And repeat on this side. Remember, our fold is going towards the left, towards the yoke. Alright. Now that we have that done, we're going to lay it out flat with the right side facing up again, as such, and then we're going to fold the right side on top of the right side. And this is where we will match up the pits. And this is, again, where it starts coming together. So I like to start on the pits and then work our sleeves up. Boom, boom, boom. And then come down to the bottom. Make sure that lines up nice and clean. Beautiful. Now we're going to mimic it on this side. Remember, right sides are facing each other, so you should see all the seams and the serges on the outside. That's a good way to remind yourself. And just do a little reality check that, yes, everything, the right sides are facing each other because I can see the wrong sides. Start at the pits. Make sure our outsides line up right there. Down to the bottom, line up our bottom. You can see it's not perfectly symmetrical, but we can work with it. If you have too much material, you can also just pin it into the armpit like that, and you really won't be able to see it. I think that's what we're going to try here. And again, like I said, nothing is ever perfect. You saw even in the templates that I took out, there were some interesting flaws. And that's just the name of the game. Gotta work with it, work around it. And then we can hop back to our machine. And sew our sides down. And again with the other side. And right back to our serger. And this is a good example of what I mean by it's a good idea to zigzag and or just close off your seams, because as you can see this is going crazy already. So we're just gonna do a nice little tidy up. And again on the other side. And that just looks beautiful. Now, where'd my scissors go? Yep. Can just clean up our stitches. And this is actually a good time to turn it right side out and do a dry fit. Test it out. Try it on. Because we are looking at everything except our collar. And you can really just try it on and see how it's feeling, see how it's fitting. Oh, this is going to be sweet. It's going to be a great little button up. So, now that we have the main body, you can lay it out. Check it out, how we're looking. And we should have no raw edges except for our collar. That is just looking beautiful. So our next step is going to be working on our collar. So our next step with our collar is we have the base of the collar and we have the collar itself. We will take the collar, two pieces of the collar, and if it is a directional fabric, again, you want to have the right sides facing each other. It's not terribly concerning. And you can see that one is slightly bigger than the other. So we're going to really try our best to stretch these and have it match up and everything, and that'll help it lay down in the long run. So again, I guess I didn't say that, but we have the collar, and then this part right here, you'll be able to tell it'll be a little more curved. We won't sew this, so we're going to sew here, here, here. Kind of like a weird U. Ow. And again, we're just going to give it a little stretch. So usually you want to stretch it. I don't think it's going to work for this case because this material is not stretchy at all. I will try my best. Should be alright. Then we're just going to work out a little bit of the extra. Alright. Now that we have that, take our scissors and just snip off those corners. Snip off any extra fabric that we don't really want to deal with. This is alright. And then we're going to flip it right side out. These corners can be tricky. You can take something that won't cut through it and just poke out those corners until it's looking nice and clean. Alright, now, again, you can press this so the seam is nice and flat, but we're going to just do a top stitch now. And if this is your first time doing collars, I would recommend pressing it. I've done this a fair amount of times. So I feel somewhat comfortable doing it as such. I really hope you guys can see this and you're not just staring at the top. Maybe I gotta lean back a little. Cheeto, don't chew on that. Please do not chew on that. Play with a ball. Alright, now we have our collar, and again you can press it if you would like. I like how it's looking. Now we're going to take our collar base, and you'll notice we have these slopes. We want the slopes on the bottom when we're pinning this together. So just like we did with our yoke and our main back piece, we're going to do a little sandwich action. We want to make sure our collar is lining up. Beautiful. And then we can even take, I don't know where my ruler is. Maybe we'll just use something to gauge it. So that is 1 SD. Perfect. But you just want that to be symmetrical. And then we're going to sandwich our other piece on top. Get a couple clips going. Beautiful. And we're going to sew along the outside. Then we're going to flip this right side out as such. Make sure we captured both sides of our collar. Looks good on this side. And so see, we missed a little bit right there, and a little bit right there. And that's okay. We're just going to come back up here. And we're just going to move our line in a little bit. Just about 1/8 of an inch. Hopefully it'll capture the excess. Cheeto, quit chewing on stuff. Alright, you're done. See you later. Alright, that looks a lot better. And again, like I said, we're going to flip it right side out. And like previously, if you want to press it, you can. But we're going to do a nice little top stitch. Beautiful. And our collar will flip down like that. Now let's attach it to our shirt. Alright. So we have our button up laid out. We have our collar. And just the way it falls, I want to have it fall like that. It looks nice. And I think that'll work. So, just like we've always been practicing, right sides go together. The tricky part with the collar is we have these two pieces and we just want to sew the inside one. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to pin it. But you see, I'm not pinning the outside, just the inside. So we are going to work this around the shirt. And then I'm going to come to the other side. Because being a lefty, it's a little easier working towards myself. And it looks like got a little bit of extra, which is okay. No need to worry. I'm just gonna distribute it a little bit. And I think we can work with that. So now we're going to our machine. And we need to be really kind of precise with this. We just want to sew the bottom piece. We want to keep that top piece out of the way. Okay, and this is why we have only sewn the top. So we're going to take this seam and we're going to fold it on top of itself. And in doing so, it's going to hide that seam. So fold down the seam and then roll this over. And this is going to allow us to hide that seam. Okay, I just went back through and redistributed it a little bit better. Moved some material around. I think it looks great. So now, our last and final touch is our buttons. With our buttons, we're going to want to lay out our shirt. Oh yeah, this is looking awesome. We are almost there, guys. So, I'm just going to have it laid out nice. And I want these bottom parts to match up. Boom. Take something like a pen. We're going to find our template, preferably both sides. And being that we have these buttonholes and buttons still in position, we're going to use it to just make a nice little mark. Maybe a Sharpie or something. That should be alright. And we're just going to lightly mark out where our buttonholes go. And looks like it's missing a button, so we're just going to translate that. And there's always a button up top. And then now that we have that, we can just mirror it across. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Alright, now we need to get our buttons ready to rock and roll. So I'm going to take these off. I think the green will actually look cool, but I think it's missing a button. That's probably why it ended up at the thrift store. Unless it's sitting around here somewhere. There's the top button. I don't think I have an extra green button, but we'll see what we can do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Maybe sometimes shirts come with extra buttons on them, which unfortunately I don't think they are in this case. Don't have any extras sewn in anywhere. Oh, no. Well, we're one button short. That kind of sucks. Let's see if I have anything remotely similar. Whoa. I have... Okay, so that green shirt was missing one button, and I don't want to have just one button not matching, so we're going to go with these kind of clear white-ish buttons. It will work out great. So we're going to start on the right side. The right side will be our buttonholes, and then we will go to attaching the buttons. So firstly, we're going to need to get our buttonhole attachment. If you don't have one of these, there is ways around it. Pretty much a buttonhole, let's see if I can show you, is a rectangle, and then you seam rip the middle, and that allows for no fraying. So you can just sew a rectangle in a zigzag stitch really small, and it will work if you don't have this attachment. I'm pretty sure most modern machines do have this attachment, but there are ways around it if you don't have that going in your favor. So we're going to find our hole, or our little mark, and stitch. There's buttonhole number 1. And if you do have this attachment, that's going to be the center of the buttonhole. So we want to go slightly past it. Two. Three. Four. And then our last one up here, we're going to do it sideways. And we have all of our buttonholes. Now let's go to our buttons. I'm going to remove this attachment and add our button attachment. This is just like a little rubber piece that you can use, and it will hold our button in place. So we're going to switch over to our button setting. And then the width is 3.5 millimeters. That should be what this width is, and the width is from hole to hole. If it is different, you can go in and adjust it, or you might have to hand stitch actual buttons in if your machine does not have a button sewing feature. So I'm just going to line that up. And just to make sure I'm at the right spot and I'm not going to break a needle, I'm going to hand crank it, and she's going to go, so we're going to rip it. Nope. Don't have enough thread out. Pull a little more out. I usually like to go across at least twice. And then we're going to pull our needle up, scoot down to our next holes. And then instead of having the machine cut it, we're going to pull it out and leave some thread, because we will need to hand tie these. If you don't, it'll just unravel itself. So there's one. Again, leave some extra thread so we can tie it off. And we're just going to work our way down. And this is really our last few steps before we can try it on. Alright, I will see you guys once I have the rest of these sewn on. Alright, so we have sewn on all of our buttons. We've got a whole bunch of danglies. We're going to go to our back side, and we're going to pull the thread through. And then we're going to hand tie these together. I usually do one overhand, two overhand, 1, 2, good to go. And you will see there is one extra on the front. That guy doesn't matter. So again, come to the back, pull our thread through, one overhand, two overhand, 1, 2, and we're good. Pull it through, one overhand, 2, and then a double loop. Well, I hope you guys have enjoyed. I would love some tips on, hey Zach, explain this a little better. Hey Zach, maybe try this next if you want me to make something else. I will be making a lot more tutorials, but this is my first ever GoPro attempt, and I think it'll be really cool so you guys can actually see my whole process. Yeah, now that I've got these tied off, I'm going to snip off the excess, making sure I'm not cutting the knots themselves. But I can do pants tutorials, I can break down how to, like, simple sewing techniques if you want. This is a pretty intermediate project, so if you'd like to actually learn the sewing basics, I'm happy to explain that stuff. This is more so you know how to sew, this is how you make a button-up. But if you don't know how to sew, and this is intriguing to you, I will happily make sewing basics kind of tutorials. And we are done with our button side. Now let's go to our buttonhole side. And I don't have my seam ripper, I broke it. So I'm just going to use my X-Acto blade, and I'm going to cut a hole, and I want to make sure I'm not cutting either sides of the buttonholes, or that will kind of ruin the whole idea of our buttons. And then I'm just going to come to the back, snip off the little flagellum dudes. I don't know why I specifically call them that. Just little stragglers. And some people will say to cut off all the excess pieces as you go through. I kind of like to do it at the end. It's just like my tidying up. Hey, I finished. Let's make sure all of our threads are cut off. But yeah, guys, we have just made our first button. So let's try it on. Let's go style it and see what it looks like.